Perfect.
Perfect.
Thank you very much, Laura, and all the other people. So great to see you here today on this student careers workshop. And in fact, we will address the question, how do I survive the academic career, career workshop from a PhD and also junior faculty perspective. I'm not yet on the job market myself, so I also have a lot of questions. And today we have 5 board members of the ODC division. We have Laura Fay, we have Minji Gao, we have David Bright, Patrice Rosenthal, and Richard Stegman. So thank you, so great that you are here to share your valuable insights and reflections. And then these are the aims for today. So the 5 board members, they will share their experiences and will offer practical application tips. Then we will move on to the plenary section, in which we create a safe and open space to share your dreams, your aspirations, but also your fears and maybe anxieties. And we will conclude with a Q&A. I will hand it over to Minji and Laura.
Hi everyone. For those of you that doesn't know me, I'm Minji Gao. I'm an assistant professor at King's College in London. So for the next 20 minutes or so, me and Laura is going to cover some of the questions that are related to being on the job market for the first time, for example. So what are the different types of academic positions? What is the hiring process, the procedure? What are the materials that you need to prepare, as well as some of the questions for consideration. So before I dive into the different type of positions, I'm going to quickly hand over to Laura first so that she can introduce herself to all of you.
Thank you, Minji. Hi, everyone. I'm Laura. I'm a lecturer at Leuphana University in Germany. And I was in the job market actually last year around this time. And that was the first time that we did this seminar. So it's a very fresh experience. And I'm looking very much forward when we share the different perspectives, especially on the US job market and the European job market, but also maybe a little bit the differences that come with different countries in general. Okay.
Next slide. Yes, thank you so much, Danny. So I'm going to first quickly introduce some of the different types of academic positions. I know there are, I do want to highlight that me and Laura's overview will be more tailored to those of you that want to go for a more academic emphasized position rather than a practitioner-based position. And there is definitely some difference based on the country that you're applying for. We have different terminologies and there are different types of contract that pertain to the different situations of each country. But very broadly speaking, when you're on the job market, you're looking at 3 different types of positions. So the first one would be research focused. You might be hearing the term lecturer, assistant professor. Those are normally tenure-track long-term positions that requires research and teaching. And some of you might consider something that is more research-focused, so postdoc, research fellow, again, very different based on the different countries that you're applying for, more prevalent in EU than the United States or North American job market, and it's a position that mostly dedicated to research. And we have a second type, which is more teaching focused. Again, lecturer, assistant professor, depending on the country, they might put a bracket saying that this is a position for education. You can also get a sense of what they're looking for based on the job description. So normally for teaching focused position, there will be a stronger emphasis on teaching excellence in advertisement. We also have some short-term contract positions, instructor, teaching fellow, adjunct professor. So those are some things that you could consider. We have excellent guests here today who understand practitioner-oriented positions a bit better. So you will hear from them later on. But if you're looking for a position that is a bit more practitioner oriented, so some schools will be hiring clinical professor, and those are positions for individuals normally with a significant amount of industry experience.
Next slide, Minji.
Yes, please.
Thank you so much.
All right, I'm taking over here. So as I said earlier, this is a pretty general distinction that we made. Now, of course, with different schools and different places in these regions, we will see different outlooks of how this is being interpreted. But starting from the left and then going to the right, looking at the US job market first. So very often there's a primary and a secondary market. And you might have heard about that. There's this kind of job market, which opens every year with the Academy of Management meeting and then basically goes on from there. So this depends a bit on if we have a research-focused school or a teaching-based school, and it also depends a bit on the different cycles the universities go through. So maybe in some cases there might be a certain position opened up because someone went on maternity or paternity leave. So then also, of course, in certain settings, job openings can come up at earlier points. Otherwise, we would normally have this classical job market year starting with the Academy of Management. It's a very competitive job market, but there is normally a lot of focus on the tenure process. So as Minji mentioned earlier, difficulty here pronunciating everything. It is so that the postdoc position is something that is way more often used in the European countries because the doctoral dissertation time is way shorter. In Northern American places, we have a longer PhD time, and due to this, normally afterwards a direct transferability to become faculty and go, for example, in an assistant professor role, which is then very often coupled to a tenure process, which means there will be criteria involved, which mean that afterwards you could stay if you fulfill these criteria at this institution. So here we have quite a high expectation regarding papers and things you have had to achieve because of this longer period of the PhD. But this also leads to, if you are getting a position in the US, a higher salary compared to usually the European equivalents. It does make sense to build your network and to get a better understanding of details of the US job market, to think about maybe doing an institutional visit and visit an US institution if you're interested in this, as well as to apply quite broadly. On the other side, if we look to the European market, we don't have this very classic structure of saying, like with the Academy of Management, we have the circle going on. Of course, a lot of schools also recruit through this, and we will come to recruiting processes later on in detail, but we normally have more like an ongoing market. So there will be job openings continuously being posted. There are some attempts, as I said, to kind of like regulate this more or put this in certain types of orders, but there's a lot of difference between different countries and schools, what they prioritize or how they approach this. So for example, in certain countries, it's important that you have finished your PhD and submitted your thesis and are completely done before you can even apply or be in the final steps of the application, while in other places it is totally normal that you maybe have your PhD defense way in front of you, but you're already securing a job position. Again, here we have research versus teaching schools, and we also have what Minji introduced earlier when we look at the clinical professorship, for example, in the German system, the University of Applied Science, if you'd like to have a stronger industry focus. It's also a competitive market. There is a lot of different approaches, as I already said. So for different places in Europe, we have differences between the application and recruitment processes, between tenure process and expectations, and the contract length. And we're going to cover a few things on this. I can mainly speak for the German and the British market, and we're going to try and provide as much detail there as we can, or forward you on to resources that we think will be helpful. And with this, we can go to this next slide, and I forward this on to Minji again. Thank you.
Thank you. So you must have seen that there's so much variability in the job market in Europe and North America. So where do you get all the informations? What I'm going to introduce you is what I call the rabbit hole, which is a crowdsourced Google Doc that has information about management job positions that has been published almost across the world. The good thing is that it's very essential. It's not fully comprehensive, especially if your subject is slightly rare or niche in comparison to the traditional macro and macro division of management business school jobs, but they do provide a good info on what's going on. Why do I say is do not check it compulsively? Because the amount of information on the spreadsheet is too much. So it really could subsume you into looking information all the time and taking a big chunk of your otherwise very precious time every day. There are other sources where you could also find job postings. For instance, AOM listserv will have jobs coming up when the time is around August. There are screening interviews. In particular, if you're looking for jobs in the UK, jobs.ac.uk is a really good reference for that, given that I've been in the UK job market all the time. And a very important thing is to ask your supervisors, to ask around, because many times jobs gets passed along in small conversations. And if you know the people on the committee, you will have a better understanding of what is required and expected from the position. With that, I will pass on to Laura again.
Thank you, Minji. We're now coming kind of to the question what to actually prepare and when to prepare what. So in general, it's very helpful if you have a CV kind of always ready. And that's also really something that you should kind of look at, update regularly. So that means if you win any awards, get accepted to conferences, this is something you can really put onto your CV and you should keep up to date. So if there's an opportunity coming up, you have a CV at hand. And going now from the left to the right again, starting with the AOM interviews, we already mentioned that some schools start the interviewing process there. So there is then a separate application process that is guided through the AOM. So therefore, we say look at the listserv or career page from the Academy of Management, where you can then apply for interviews and meet people. So this is a good chance if you're either way traveling to this conference to then actually maybe meet someone from the school, as Minji just mentioned, where in other circumstances you might not be able to have that in-person contact and you could maybe only contact them, for example, via LinkedIn to get a first impression. So these interviews would take place mid-July to early August, usually during AOM. Some organizations also have, or institutions have first rounds before AOM, start a first screening, and then talk to promising candidates again during AOM. And sometimes they really only need a CV, and sometimes it can be a full application that you send in. And this really depends on the school and the priorities that they are setting there. If we look at what a full application also for positions in general consists of, so this normally means you're writing a cover letter, which takes usually, or my experience was, a lot of time. And especially when you're drafting this for the first time, I really planned like a full week in drafting my application, because you really have to tailor this a lot to the individual institutions, to the faculty members there, and to show how you fit with the faculty. And that takes quite a lot of time. So I'm just saying that time-wise, because that maybe helps you to get an idea there of what is needed. Now, of course, later on, if you have your CV and research statement up to date, then it will take less time, and then maybe there's only little tweaks required. So looking at this again, we have the cover letter where you'd introduce yourself, you showcase kind of the fit. Maybe you see, you want to introduce certain faculty members that you've seen, that you feel like there's a connection, research, teaching wise. Then you'd have your CV, which really should showcase on one side your teaching experience. It can, that would be a priority. If you go in a teaching role, I'd put that first. If you're going in a research role, I'd put the research activities first. But it would also showcase things of like awards or any grants, and grants for PhD candidates, for example, are also things like scholarships, funds that you got to attend any kind of conference. This is all things that show that you're able to organize yourself and to kind of like get these first steps up to actually later on do bigger grant writing. So this is really things you can put on there. And the research statement then really shows like, who are you as a researcher? Now, this is of course something that schools know will develop with your knowledge and understanding, but what you're trying to show here is where you're at and maybe also what your pipeline or outlook is. And you can indicate here through the cases that you show or the objectives you maybe have with your research, as well as where you'd like to maybe submit certain ideas or working papers, where you're looking for and how you understand where you're making a contribution, and therefore see like how you fit to the school. The job market paper means that you should think which is maybe the paper that shows your skills the best. Usually, if you're doing a free paper dissertation, this potentially would be one of your PhD thesis papers that has been developed the most. You have had the chance maybe to present it at different conferences. Maybe in some cases, it's a piece that has been published or will be published soon. And so it's really a piece you're proud of and you can show. So it makes sense to, if you maybe are working on all your thesis papers currently, to think about one that you can polish to the extent that if this is required, you have one handy and you wouldn't need to start kind of getting that ready. The teaching portfolio and teaching philosophy very much talks about what teaching experience you have, how that teaching experience took place. So for example, there you can really describe the tasks you did, which is important because in different countries, things are called differently. And you can also maybe say like what the ranking was that students gave you, what the feedback was that you got, as well as if you have a certain way of like teaching that's maybe unusual or really incorporates the students. This is all things that you can show here. And then lastly, for the full application, the letter of recommendation. So this is something, it depends country-wise again, if you would put a list of references at the end of your CV, and then the school would reach out to them in case they would like to put you forward, and they will provide a reference directly, or if you include already a letter of recommendation. So it made sense to think about who could this be for you? Is this maybe one of your supervisors? Will this maybe be another authoritative person that you have had the chance to co-author with, or that you done an institutional visit with? So this makes sense to kind of early think about. And then just briefly, and then I hand over to Minji again, there can be other writing samples that are required, a general application form, for example, for the US market and diversity and inclusion statement, any kind of teaching evaluations. So instead of just saying, okay, I've been gotten out of 5, a 4.9 for this and this course, it could be that they'd actually ask you to put the full teaching evaluation in that your school has been doing. So try and collect them if you can. Or it could be, depending on the career path you're taking and the school, that they'd like to see any contributions you've done to industry or practice. And with this, I hand over to Minji again.
Thanks, Laura, for such a comprehensive review of what is required. So I'm going to briefly talk about some of the things that you want to consider when you are preparing for the interview. I know this is very far down the process of your job application, but some of the things that you want to think about is to demonstrate that you have a clear explanation of why your research fits with the school that you are interviewing with. And that links back to the research statement where you want to demonstrate your fit with the school and the position you are applying for. The other thing that you want to consider is your research future. So rather than talking about what you have been doing, think about your research career and your identity and the pipeline that you're trying to build. How do you see yourself in 5 years? What is the field that you want to be known for? What type of literatures will you be engaging with? Do you have any future collaborations and collaborators that you could signpost to the panel of your the interview panel? Again, this links back to your research statement and your resume. And you also want to show that you can teach. What is your teaching identity? What are some of the modules that you have been working on teaching T8 for? Or what are some of the class that you will be willing to teach? This would involve researching the school and the programs that they offer. What are some of the modules that they have in their current programs, and how can you contribute? But you can also think about how can you complement what they already offer in the school. Again, that's something that you could signpost both in your CV, in your application package, but also remember to demonstrate that to the school. Sometimes the school, for instance, in the UK context, are not allowed to share your CV and personal statement with everyone that's listening into your presentation because of data confidentiality. So you really want to think about how do you demonstrate yourself on the day. So in terms of job talk, there's so much variation when it comes to it based on the country that you're applying for, as well as the position that you're applying for. But typically it would involve 1 to 1.5 hours of presenting your research and your other work. Then you will have very likely back-to-back meetings with faculty members or the hiring committee, sometimes the PhD students as well. You might do a mock teaching, so a teaching demo of 20 minutes or 1 hour on the subject that you are confident of or competent with. And you also want to explain how your research fits with the group and the school's mission in the long term. That's really, all of this are really standard and important, but having been through the job market and being on the other side of the table as well, I think another thing that you want to remember is that you are also evaluating the school. So through every interaction that you have with faculty members, PhD students, people that are on the searching committee, you also are checking if this is a good environment for you, right? Once you are in the job, it's very likely that you're going to be there for 7 years, a decade, or even longer. So first and foremost, you want to make sure that it's a working environment that you want to associate yourself with. And with that, I'll pass on to Laura again.
Thank you, Minji. So things to kind of consider to do, depending on when you are on the market, are thinking about like who will be your recommendations. So as I said earlier, like communicate with your advisors or committee supervisors, depending on how this is called in your institution and country, to kind of think about now who could be someone who can act as a reference or provide the letter of recommendation so that you know whom to ask. And of course, before you put people on your CV and the reference category, you need to have informed them about this and they need to be happy to do this. Think about, as we said earlier, the job market paper. So getting that ready and really thinking about which one should it be. Maybe also here ask advisors, mentors to get an idea like which paper you should maybe choose. Maybe also depending on the role that you'd like to go into later on. Think about updating your LinkedIn profile, or for example, if you have the chance of a university profile, maybe put up a picture there, make sure it's up to date and it doesn't constrict itself with actually what you're saying in your CV. You want to have that going together. Maybe update your Google Scholar if relevant, or any personal website. You can put up assign to job alerts, for example, with the AUM divisional listserv, or for example, LinkedIn and other job search opportunities. And it really makes sense to have a support network. So try and make sure when you hand in applications and stuff, and you will potentially get rejections as well, as this is a very competitive market, to have something ready what you do in those cases. Maybe exercise, get a hot chocolate, talk to friends, so that you're not alone in this process, and that you already prepare, especially also with your mental health for this. You can practice your public speaking in any kind of events, from just chit-chatting to people to having a formal job talk prep at your institution or maybe with friends. Very similar to if you do a mock viva or thesis defense. And really talk to people who just finished the job market, because they're very close to your experience and can help you with this. Okay, and with this, I would hand over again.
Thank you. So I noticed that some of you are still in the early stage of your PhD study, and it's great that you are here at the workshop today. So if you still have some time left, meaning that you are 2 years, maybe even 3 years away being on the job market, so there are some of the things that you can do and prepare strategically now to make your job market experience slightly less hectic and smoother. So build your network, go into conferences that works for you, apply to our doctoral consortia, because it's a really good experience to engage with peers that are interested in similar topics, but you're also going to get assigned mentors who can comment on your research and career progression. Introductions through advisors always work, and think about collaborations and research stays in a different country, which again is a good way to build your network. Think about your personal goals. Are you going for a teaching or research focused position, or do you want something that is more balanced and hybrid? And that will shift where your attention is to some extent. Think about the type of positions that you want to do. Do you want to do a few more years of research before attempting a tenured job, or do you want to go into a tenured position immediately? What type of system do you like? Do you have any geographic location preference? Because the job market in each country does vary quite a lot. And think about your field of interest. Do you want to have an identity such as I'm an ODC scholar, or do you want to be someone that sits at intersection of different fields? And that will very much decide which type of groups or faculties that you will engage with, the language that you speak, so to speak. And the last and the most important thing, I think, is really to think about and reflect on what is your academic identity, your research publications. A lot of schools will refer to different lists, right? So in the UK, we have ABS. Across the world, I think people use FT50 or the UTD list. So think about how do you want to signpost your research. Talk about prepare your presentations, speak at conferences, and think about whether you want to be an expert in a certain field, or do you have a bit more flexibility with the theory, the research setting, the story that you are trying to tell as a researcher. And also prepare yourself in teaching. Don't teach everything and anything. Focus on something that you're good at, because teaching preparation takes time. Even being a TA and grading takes time as well, right? So think about the numbers and type of courses that you want to be teaching on. Be very conscious of course evaluations and the student letters, because sometimes those numbers and figures will come in handy. So if you don't have a teaching evaluation yet and your institution can provide you that, really push for it, because then you have one more thing to comment on your teaching statement, cover letter, or put it on your CV. So yeah, if you still have a lot of time left before the job market, really start thinking ahead, and that will make your life slightly easier when it comes to it. So with that, I think I will pass on to the rest of our panelists today.
So thank you so much, Minji and Laura, for your great review. I think it's very insightful to have this broad perspective, and also to learn a lot what you can do already right now, even if you are very early in your PhD journey. Because of the time, we have 22 minutes left. I think I will hand it over to Richard, Patrice, and David, and then we can maybe left 10 minutes for the plenary. Is that okay for everyone?
You've handed it over to me. Looking at these questions, they're all important, but I'm going to focus on bullet number 3. What are the most common mistakes you see in CVs and cover letters? Search committees vary at different universities. For example, at the University of San Francisco, we usually have 3 people from the discipline or the department, and then we bring in someone from the outside. The University of San Francisco is Jesuit Catholic, and so our mission is very important to us. I cannot emphasize enough that your cover letter needs to reflect that you've read the job description and that you understand the mission of the school. Because we may get 60 or 70 applications at USF, and we'll be narrowing those 60 or 70 down to about 10 that we will be doing Zoom interviews with. If we're interviewing at the academy, that number goes up. But to narrow it down, the initial thing we're looking for is they're a potential fit. The other thing, we are a research 2 to research 3 school. So while research is important, teaching's also important. And the desire to be of service, both within the school, university, and the community, but also the profession. So we're looking for a well-rounded individual, and that needs to be conveyed in the cover letter. And then as you go into the CV, we look for evidence of that. And we also look for evidence of potential. So the CV needs to align with what you've done so far, why a given school is a good fit, but then coming to a given school and its mission, how are you going to thrive? How are you going to continue to build your academic persona and profile and all that? Sort of answers what qualities do hiring committees value most in candidates, and that is their fit, and are you going to thrive or grow at the university? I'll stop right there and allow David or Patrice to weigh in.
I really appreciate that response, and I think I would share that perspective. It's important to understand what the school is about you're applying to. You don't have to know like all the intricate details, ins and outs about the institution, but you should have a basic understanding of the type of institution it is and the orientation. That's especially important, I think, at an institution like Richard's, where there's a strong values orientation. Before I go on, I'd like to invite any of our participants to write down your thoughts or questions in the chat. Maybe I could invite everyone to just write an answer to this question. What's the most important insight you've gained from the presentation thus far? And what question might you have that you would especially like us to answer? So let me invite you to write a response to the in the chat. While you're doing that, I think I'll answer the first one. How can I build a network in academia if I'm considering applying to institutions outside my current network? So building a network is important? And there's several answers to this question. I think the classic answer to this, as any other question, is like, it depends. It depends a lot on what it is you're striving to do and be. So I'm going to make some assumptions here that regardless of your ultimate goals in your career, that all of you are interested in establishing a network through the Academy of Management, which has some really specific tools that are helpful. So one is what you're doing right now, which is showing up and participating in division-sponsored activities. And, the ODC division is one of many divisions. Our division is especially oriented toward developing a collegial, supportive environment. And I think it's one of the hallmarks of our division that people feel very welcome, nurtured, and supported here. And so that's the number one thing you can do, is show up to ODC division events and just be present. Just getting into that space and being willing to talk and to introduce yourself and see who shows up is important. And just that simple action will open up opportunities for you to have conversations that will lead to connections that can be lifelong. So that'd be my first answer, is show up. Find events such as this, and especially go to the meetings in person and just be present. So a second bit of advice I'd offer there is to focus more on building connections from a perspective of authenticity than because you want something, right? The strongest connections you can make, the strongest network that you can build will come because you're finding genuine connection with other people. And so that means that you not only do you show up, but you show up as you. So be true to yourself and be willing to let others be true to who they are, and be interested and curious in learning about other people. And so whenever you have a conversation with anyone in these conversations, ask them questions about their background, ask them questions about what they're interested in and how they got to the positions that they are in and what they've learned. And so just being curious goes a long way toward helping to build those connections. And then one final very practical tip I'd offer is that as you write papers, and particularly as you have papers or other scholarship accepted, really powerful technique that I learned years ago is to go through the references that you have cited and then send a copy of your work to those individuals that you cited, with a little note about the contribution that they made to your paper and something about what you did. And it's very hard to resist when you receive a message like that. It's like, I've cited your paper and I just wanted you to have a copy of it and would love to hear your perspective. It's a fantastic way to let others know about your work and about the way in which others are contributing to your efforts. And that can lead to some connections that can be long lasting as well. And it also is an invitation to them to cite your work in their future work. So that's those are just a few thoughts on building a network.
Thank you so much, Richard and Dave. Patrice, can you maybe just a few minutes?
Yes, no, I see that we don't have much time at all. So I will not go in a different direction, I will say that to me, the big thing that comes across from this presentation and from the sharing of my colleagues is the notion of fit and the notion of it depends. So answers to these great questions would be so different depending upon whether you want to pursue a research-oriented path, in American parlance, R1, R2, or a different kind of path. So I use the particular language of scholar practitioner programs. So I lead 2 doctoral programs at Fielding Graduate University, and we are looking for something different than we would have looked for at King's College, where I taught before. So what I'm going to do is not take any time, but I'm just going to put it in the chat. You can have a look at it later. Just give you a kind of sense of what we would be looking for in scholar practitioner space. So Richard talked about values orientations, and that's very, very important. You might think about the language that the institution is going to want to hear. So we don't talk even so much about teaching, we talk about mentoring. So I think the idea of making decisions for yourself about which path you want to take, or realizing that your presentation of self is going to have to be very different depending upon the institution that you're applying for. So I think fit is very important. It depends is very important. And I cannot underscore the importance of the cover letter fitting to the advert and also having your personal voice. Committees are looking at a large number of candidates. And so standing out with a vivid voice and attachment to the advert itself is particularly important. And Danny, I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much all for sharing your great insights and providing us with great tips. Let's see if we have some questions in the chat. I think we can now stop the recording, then we have a safe and open space for the plenary discussion. Dinah or David,